Everybody, happy Friday and welcome back to Indie Game Business. You have the pleasure of being with just me and my guest, Derrick Fields, today as our good buddy, Indy Dan, is cruising on his Harley down for a weekend vacation. But we've got Pebs with us, so we've got everything. I should only screw up a minor amount of this like I do when I don't have Dan's assistance because Pebs is awesome and we love her, and that's what it is. So welcome, Derrick. We're going to be talking about surviving and thriving in the indie development, or as the other catchphrase has caught on this year, survive till 25.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
What's going on and how people can minimize risk and just the landscape in general. So, but let's start where we always start. So give us a rundown of how you originally got into games and then walk us through your career up to this point.
Yeah. Okay. So up to today, I still kind of live by the same mantra, and that is, if another human is doing it out there, I firmly believe that, we as other fleshy humans are capable of the same outcomes with enough time, of course. And so my background started as an illustrator. I went to university because I wanted to pursue becoming a concept artist, a character artist specifically. I still draw as much as possible today. I think at some point it was impressed upon me that there are people behind video games, despite, I don't know how I made it all the way up to university and didn't make the mental connection that people make games. And so, but suffice to say, I ended up pursuing a degree in 3D modeling. Later, had an inordinate amount of hardship trying to find placement in the industry. And then ultimately, while maintaining a full-time job as a project manager for a cosplay wig company, decided that I was going to spin up my own studio with my roommate, and then we later released Onsen Master. And so that has led to many opportunities, connections, friends, and colleagues along the way who have helped support so much of where I'm at.
I'm back. Sorry. All right. So I love that because that is like one of the mentalities that I've used over the years when I get overwhelmed or I think that, okay, I'm not going to be able to do this. It's like, starting a company and doing all this. I have that very same mentality of, oh, wait a second, those people over there are doing it and they're really no smarter than I am.
Yeah.
So I can most likely pull this off. Tell us how you made that, because now you're teaching as well. So right. You went from game development actually into the education side as well. You want to touch on that and what you're doing and why?
Yeah, how that shift happened exactly. So I think, my path into gaming and trying to figure out how to release a game came with, as much as anybody, all sorts of trials and tribulations. It was that process that I think I became really passionate about sharing that information, passing along those resources, and helping others to understand how they might be able to release a game. I still make a number of mistakes that I am very transparent about and try to get others to avoid if ever possible. And so that first started, that sort of like genesis in education started with contributing to nonprofits and helping both local and online organizations to provide mentorship as well as contribute to talks and that sort of thing. Somewhere along the way, I think I remember what it was. I joined a project that was for an educational game. And then later, that same colleague who I collaborated with nominated me for the position that he was leaving after gaining a tenure track role at another university. And so seemingly out of nowhere, until later learning that information, I just had a cold email from Northwestern University asking if I was interested in a teaching position.
Wait, you could just do that? They just email you and say, hey, do you want to be a teacher? And
sometimes, I guess, yeah.
Just a little offended now, really.
Yeah. Now being on the opposite side of the fence, I have done this a couple of times for adjunct roles. Just reached out to colleagues and asked them if they were interested in teaching a course. But yes, and then of course I did go through the credential verifications, and I had to submit a job talk, which was like giving a presentation, a thesis on why I make games, and field a lot of deeply academic questions about making games, which was all very critical and allows you to, like, in real time self-assess why it's important. So it was good.
Did you go in with that whole, okay, I can teach people how to make games, but you do realize you don't need a teacher to do this, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
so that's like that dichotomy that you're battling with the infinite amount of resources, almost infinite amount of resources available online to navigate games. There's constantly a YouTube video or Patreon or Twitter update, myself included, talking about how we're self-learning and pursuing game development in our spare times. And so, yeah, while answering those questions and trying to articulate how it could be valuable for an academic space, and then in the back of my mind going, every student could leave my course and go, I'm going to look up everything that he just talked about, and I'm going to find every resource that has supported this curriculum on YouTube or the blog or whatever, and just pursue it on my own. And I'll go, yes, please do it. Just let me know how I can help you is really where I'm at.
see, I think that's awesome. We were talking before we went live about, how it is interesting. There's so many universities. I mean, when I first started, this did not exist. There was no
Right.
such thing as a game program anywhere.
Right.
And then we saw them grow and grow and grow. And now they're, everywhere. But it's one of those things that we have to constantly ask, are they there to actually help students, or are they there in many cases? And I'm not saying this is the way Northwestern is.
Yeah.
I've already told you my example of this.
Yeah.
But where it's like, oh, wait, if we tell people they can be a game designer, well, they'll give us a bunch of money for a degree.
Yeah.
And so it's good to see, the question I had to you before we started was, are they teaching business and marketing? And
Right.
you said yes. And I think that is a fantastic step in the right direction for a lot of these universities. So
Right. And I want to expand on that point, because my entry into a university setting in which so brief history, I originally started at an art university. I said, I want to go into gaming, and they were like, we don't offer that here. And I said, deuces. And so I transferred universities. I actually transferred universities twice. It was miraculous that I managed to carry all of my credits earned with me to effectively exit with a degree and a minor. And I too experienced that sort of genesis where another university was at the early starts of developing a video game curriculum, and trying to figure out what were the valuable things that they could bridge to students. And back then that was just 3D modeling, and then here's a game engine that is now depreciated. So I took that experience because ultimately, even with some of the bumps along the way, it was really impactful. The kind of community that gets developed in a university setting when you're building games with others can be really great. Depending on your learning style, sometimes having that formal setting can also be really great. Accountability being a really big reason why attending university, if it can be afforded, would be valuable. But that's not without saying, yes, the other components, how to 3D model, how to work on a game engine, but now how do you release a game and effectively get it to some sort of audience was a part of the critique that I had when wanting to help build curriculum at Northwestern. And so getting into that, they asked, what types of courses would you be interested in creating? And I listed out all of the traditional ones as they relate to 3D modeling and design or narrative and so on, but then also expanded on like marketing, release, biz dev, all of those things to help at least give somebody an inference of those expectations if they're seeking to develop teams.
So along those lines, walk us through, how your studio came to be. And you've released one game already. We don't need to go into deep detail, but part of what we're going through today is like how we deal with the industry in its current state. So
Yeah.
you launched your game, was it 2 years ago?
3. It's going on 3. Yeah.
So how did Waking Oni come along, and then the first game, and how did it go, and what did you learn, and how are you applying that, today?
Yeah, the initiate for Waking Oni started with just passionately wanting to make a game about Spirited Away, the Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli film. So it originated out of a deep passion of wanting to kind of live and breathe in a world that I only tangentially deeply enjoyed through that studio. And so upon we went through the process. My roommate at the time, shout outs to my buddy Tim, who was also really invigorated by the idea. We kind of took to the dry erase board and started jotting out ideas to see if something would make sense here. Time would later show that we were really energized by this while we continued to work on it part-time, both still maintaining our full-time jobs. And then later, Tim brought on the first programmer to the team, Leo, who helped to start to prototype some of the aspects that we were discussing. The ideas were huge at the time. I mean, it was pie in the sky. We had no concept of scoping down and making small games, but I'll be sure to tell you, with time experience, we were forced to make that a small game because ambition gets checked really quickly. All that to say, the sort of driving force was just working on it part-time and then realizing this is really enjoyable. I think we might have something. And then taking that thing to public events in Chicago, getting community feedback, getting playtest feedback. I was a part of an indie city games group, or what do we call it? I don't remember. Anyways, it was a part of a group where a lot of us were making indie games and we were sharing feedback with each other. And so community and networking was really valuable there. Later, we started sharing that prototype around with online events, and then finally shared it. I think it was through another event that I asked somebody what were their thoughts and experiences with a potential publisher that we were vetting as somebody that we wanted to pitch to. They had some really good things to say, and then turn around and On Semester was getting published by Whitethorn Games, who helped us release and deploy it across consoles. So yeah, going back, the sort of impetus was an anime movie, and then the designs proved that we had something, and so we just took it further.
So what were you're now looking back on it, you did as a first title from a studio, getting a publisher, getting to the market, and that alone, impressive. That's a lot of work.
Thank you.
Multi-platform launch, again, not the easiest thing in the world to do. You did that as well. What did you learn, and how are you applying that to what you're working on now, or what is now? What are you?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. As far as like things learned, I would, if I were to rewind and make Own Semester, or follow the release of Own Semester, I would continue to make games at that same scale, if not smaller. I would actually scale back from 3D assets and make smaller games, because the gap of which we released Own Semester to kind of being in pre-production on a new title, and then later working on some other things, was long enough in that it was not satiating this creative urge of wanting to still tell stories and wanting to still build things out. I think if you're one out there who desires making games, and you have a lot of ideas, if your brain is wired anywhere similar to mine, I think I'm being inundated with an idea at the drop of stuff that drops. But to be able to make games and have the agency to make games small and fast, I think is really powerful. It allows you to leverage experiences quicker. It allows you to understand the ethos of games that you want to build quicker. That is kind of the experience that was learned after the release of Own Semester, and one that we're deeply pursuant of now. So yeah, I think that was the kind of the main question about like, what did we figure out afterwards?
So, and I love the fact that you're talking about smaller games, because I think in many cases, especially newer devs, overlook that. And it's, in my opinion, one of the biggest mistakes. I don't know how many new studios I see, they come out and they're like, I have this $5 million project. And I'm like,
it's an MMO.
It's a $500,000 project. Yeah. It's not that simple. And so we frequently tell people, start small. You can get bigger, but start small. And right now, what we're seeing in the industry on the consulting side is if you're under $1 million in your budget, it's easier to get a publisher to find a partner. And then ironically, if you're over $10 million, it's a little easier. But that range, that mid-size range in that 1 to 10 million is like the really, really tough spot now. So
Yeah.
without going into too much detail, or you can go into as much as you want, when you're talking about smaller games, were you originally looking at that game as, a $500,000 to $1 million game, a multi-million-dollar game, a sub
Right.
$500,000 game? What are you looking at and calling a small project?
Today, I call a small project it's sub $200,000. If you can make a game at $100,000 to $120,000, I think that's an ideal range to pursue game development right now. I think it also creates a strategy for dialing back scope and focusing on gameplay and training yourself to create really impactful things in small ways. That experience came from wanting to pitch a big game. Following the release of Own Semester, Waking Oni was taking a developmental shift where we were trying to understand the identity of what types of games we ultimately wanted to build. And I was both seeing and chatting with other developers who were either newly formed teams or had released games at a similar capacity to ours, now receiving funding in the range of 10 million and upwards of 30 million even. And so the information that I was working with at the time was that it might be possible to actually pitch a game for 15 to 30 million dollars. And I was running with that energy very confidently for a while. I went through a whole GDC, and I say that as like a round of a period where I was really confidently pitching for that funding goal, and then and then still watching colleagues and other mutuals in the industry navigating the same process, not necessarily having a full grasp on what was happening in the background, especially as it later expanded to what we see now, as far as like how tightly funding has constrained. And so slowly the sentiment started to shift. It started to shift from mixed messages of, oh yeah, we could do that, or oh no, that's way too out of scope, or you don't have enough meat on the bones, or this looks like a really effing cool idea. It started to shift to, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. And so we started to shift our scale, we started to shift our scope. And then I think the biggest radical shift was a previous game that we were working on, thanks to the developer acceleration fund at ID at Xbox. We decided to shelve it and say, we're going to shift and make a radically different, radically smaller game than what we originally were scoping. We had a 3D combat RPG with like social sim mechanics that were sitting on a hiatus.
So it ties. We've already got a question in that like fits in perfectly from Mendisa on Discord. How do you balance out small and fast with increasing player expectations?
I think increasing player expectations might be kind of like a broad scope. We might be, if I'm understanding correctly, this is maybe saying that a broader player sentiment is increasing for maybe the quality of gameplay or the fidelity of that experience. I operate very firmly on if you build it, they will come. And so if, depending on the types of games that you want to create, there's inevitably going to be an audience for that. How small or large that audience is going to be is something to navigate. So, we knowingly make games or intend to make games primarily for audience. Sorry, let me rephrase. Our games are intended to explore the cultural intersection between Black and Japanese media. This is talking about the impact of Japanese media on the Black community. It's not to say that the games are not for everybody, but that's where our sort of like impetus for making games is. And so that includes that amount of representation as well. Knowingly, that is a specific audience, or largely focused towards a specific audience, but it doesn't bar off everybody else. So to say, like, if your bag is, I want to make real-time strategy games because I just really love Command and Conquer, but let's add, like, I don't know, spooky narrative to it. Your audience is going to be real-time strategy enthusiasts, and that is a subset of the industry. And so the sort of like increasing player expectations, I think, first identifying who your target audience is, and then maybe if you are of that audience, you probably have a gut check on what that expectation is. And then I think, building small games fast, maybe each game is addressing one other additional component of those expectations. And so it might take the form of, we build a small game and it is addressing some of the strategy grievances that people have had across real-time strategy games. I just picked a random genre. I don't have anything against RTS. And then maybe the next title is adding that more fidelity, because now you have systems that are helping to inform it. And you can say, cool, we made, Stratorium 1, and now Stratorium 2 has 3D graphics, and you can see how it, you might continue to iterate. The audience that showed it for you the first time is going to continue rocking with you, up until the big game, and you're going to kind of like grow together.
But here's the other side of that, not the other side, the additional point of that. You don't have to worry as much about increasing player expectations if you're making a smaller game, because you don't have to sell it to as many people.
Right.
And that's one of the things that, I think bypasses a lot of developers. And when we're talking about, making it through this year and, getting it to next year, that's what you have to keep in mind. You don't need to sell 4 million copies.
Yeah.
To make money and run a profit on a game that you only spent $200,000 making.
Right.
Sorry, I thought I had another question coming in there, but I don't. So with that in mind, and it's funny because it's like I talk to a lot of the bigger companies in the industry too, and some of you're starting to see this mentality there, and they're like, we're looking at making micro games, and I'm like, okay, well, what is your version of a micro game? Because when I hear that, I'm thinking, Flash, mini clip back in the day type thing. And they're like, things that are like 600 to 800,000. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's not micro for some of us.
That's not micro. But to a lot of these companies, it is. And I think that's why we're seeing more options for developers if they're coming in and saying, look, here's a $500,000 game, here's a $200,000 game, than we are if they're coming in and saying, here's a $2 million, $5 million game. But yeah, it's one of those that you don't necessarily have to come out of the gate with your magnum opus. I mean, it's just not the best course.
I wouldn't recommend it. It's a lot to, like, yes, we all have that secret game that we would love to really dig into and make big. Oh, there's something in chat that I'm missing probably. So we're making Nano and Pico games.
Yes, that's what we're doing.
Do it. Yeah, but yeah, like we all have that big project that's in the back of our mind. Of course, I want to make a huge fantasy JRPG inspired game that's like multi-layered and takes multiple hours to beat. But the reality now is, like, I don't even have that time to play those types of games, and so I have no business making them. And then the scope of that comes into question. Like what do I want? Like as far as like the vision for the studio, how I want to enact in that space. Larger the game, larger the studio means a completely different subset of responsibilities. If you are owning that studio, that means you are shifting into mostly biz dev. And if you're a creative, that means compromising with some of those things that you would no longer have your hand in. It asks a lot, if you want to scale up. And so if you have a vision and you're deeply interested in executing on that vision in an intimate way, I think staying small helps to preserve that pursuit, so that you can say, I did this and I saw, with a team of people and collaborators, but I saw to its execution, from start to finish in a way that I felt innately a part of it. Not compromising with skills that I no longer get to leverage maybe.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to say, if you're a creative and you don't want to deal with the biz dev side of the industry, there are consulting firms that will handle that for you. That's what they do.
Yeah, you can delegate. Yes, that
you can delegate. It's I do it even. So given the shift that we've seen in the industry over the last, I would say 2 years at this point, because it's just kind of a shift. This turd keeps rolling downhill, and the downhill doesn't seem to stop yet. We've had these closures, we've had layoffs. One of the reports this morning, and there's some discrepancy I'm already seeing online about how they got to this, but it's like Embracer alone was worth like 4,500 layoffs and 80 projects that possibly got canceled.
Yeah.
somewhere I saw we're approaching the 40,000 mark in terms of total layoffs over the last 2 years. You know, where do studios your size, where do they fit right now? What do they need to be doing to, stay alive and not have to do a bunch of layoffs and go find real jobs?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that still kind of goes back to focusing on smaller experiences. Some studios have been forced into that ethos. Some studios are emerging with that ethos. Um, and then some have strategically shifted over to that. I think the impact of things out of Embracer and the mass number of layoffs, as well as like other experiences non-endemic to the games industry, we're seeing. Me personally, I've witnessed a lot of divesting from larger corporate entities, and I think that takes a lot of form in many different ways. I think that sort of divestment has created fuel for independent creators and small business owners across many industries to once again find ways to build for themselves so that they can interact with their community or consumer directly. As it relates to the games industry, I say the same thing, kind of going back to that initial point that people are either strategically pivoting or willingly, or unfortunately unwillingly, being forced into building smaller experiences because of financial constraint, or they seek to build agency for their studio so that they can have that creative control once again and not risk compromising with their team or their vision or any of those things.
So, one of the questions that came in is: are there any pitfalls that you commonly see indies believe while trying to survive in the environment? And one of them, of course, like we talked about, is trying to build this big gigantic game. What else are you seeing? Are there any other key points that are popping out lately that you're like, wait, no, try this instead?
Um, Other pitfalls to try and survive. Let me. Oh wow. I'm trying to reflect on some of the conversations that I had at GDC, and so this is my brain's kind of working in real time. Um,
I can get you started.
yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we had Pontus, on this was like late last year, one of our conference, and he had a wonderful slide. It's like, here are 5 things that you can do right now
Right.
to try to stay alive. One of them was look for contract work. The downside of that is everybody and their brother is looking for contract work right now.
This is
And
right.
so yes, you should be doing it, but at the same time, you have to realize how competitive it is out there.
Hmm.
Another one that we frequently see on the consulting side and on the Discord as well is the belief that publishers aren't signing anything, which is
Right.
not true at all. The problem that publishers are having right now is that they're seeing too many games. And that's why they come to us on the scouting side. I have not had a publisher come to me and say, I can't find a good game. Will you help us find one?
Hmm.
Every single client we've had is, we're seeing too much stuff. Can you help us sort through this and identify
Yeah.
the gems? And so the key thing that I constantly preach to small teams is, one, understand all your options. And we have a completely free list on our website that you can grab that has that. But two, the days of putting forth a mediocre demo or pitch deck are dead and gone. There's so many of these things going across the desks of all these publishers, and the publishers
Hmm.
are signing games. They have to do it to stay alive.
Yeah.
But it's the sheer number of projects and pitches that they're getting. You don't have any room for failure.
Yeah.
You have to make sure you've practiced your pitch. You've gone to, we do pitch deck reviews on the Discord. They're completely free. You have to make sure as a small studio, you're putting your best foot forward at every step of the way, because it's like that Nike commercial from years ago. There's somebody out there that's practicing harder,
Yeah.
that's working harder, and you have to realize that.
Yeah. Yeah, to expand on that, I think one of the things that I would add, especially as it relates to pitching, is that there maybe the belief that the publisher for your game doesn't exist. They or and this is kind of relating to the pitfall of maybe how many pitches are enough pitches to get your game funded. That number is not like a hard set number. Sometimes it's just navigating. Somebody might say fail faster. It's navigating through all of the no's to get to the yes and finding your yes. There are still some people, even with the quality of pitches and prototypes that are being asked for, that bar being raised, there is still people out there that are funding games with just pitch decks. And yes, that has been, people that have had, some sort of pedigree in the industry. And yes, that is also people who are emerging in the industry and navigating opportunities. I think those opportunities is where I would extend myself and say, pitching to fund your game is not the only path that's available to garner some sort of opportunity. I mentioned earlier that, part of our funding path was being supported by the Developer Acceleration Fund from Xbox, and that specifically provided us with prototype funding that we used to explore the combat mechanics for the would-be game. Those opportunities do exist, and it's not like a one and done thing. So if you see Xbox do it, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen again, but it also means that there are others that are going to be providing opportunities, and to try to keep your ears attuned for that, because it kind of on the back end, I too have heard and have provided consulting for other spaces that are seeking to provide funds, and they are trying to ask the question about like, well, what are developers seeking? What is it that they want support? What would be meaningful today? And all of it is an indication that there are more people with some of that financial power to be able to support that. And so look for those. Look for the accelerators, the funds, the grants, and all of those things too.
Look for the grants, as long as you're not American, because in America we don't have
it's not fair.
You're basically, if you're in any other country in the world, that's a possibility. Sorry, Americans, you're not going to get it. But there is, and there's the investment side is swinging around. I mean, it's not necessarily, there are investment options out there now. We're starting to see more of it happening, but I'm with you. I've been approached by several companies that are like, okay, this is not normally what we do, but we understand there's a market in games. And so how can we get in, and how can we do more than just give money? And so that's exactly, I mean, I agree. It's like, look outside the box, or, as my wife always tells me, move the milk, because when I'm like, I can't find something in the fridge, she's like, did you move the milk? I'm like, no, but you have to do a little more work, and you got to move the milk every now and then. Another great question. Competitive analysis, obviously important when you're doing this, understanding who you're going against, why you're going against them, how you're going to be better, how you're going to be different. What is a good approach for doing that as an indie? Because, and bless you, Mendoza, Zelda is not a comparable for your indie game. No, it is not. And God, absolutely drives me crazy when people do that. So how do you approach competitive analysis when y'all are looking at making new games and pitching new games?
Yeah, when we do comps, I always have a slide that kind of does this in a tiered approach, where I first, of course, understanding our target audience, I first look at games that have also released to that target audience that either have a similar fidelity in terms of like the scope of gameplay, or a similar team size, which also gives me an indication about like roughly how much they've received for funding. That helps a lot. And so I'll say because this is kind of out there already, we're making a new small game called Take Form. It's actually a sort of existential story about game development, because this all came from going through the process of pitching and all that stuff. Save that story.
Oh my God, are you making a pitching game?
No, I'm not making a pitching game. No, I'll give you the spiel about it, at the appropriate juncture. But basically, in our comps, we had one game that was similar in scale, both in length, fidelity, and team size. And then I did my best to research any of the metrics that were available for that, because some of that information's changed as far as like what's publicly accessible. and I will lean into those important bits. Hey, this game released, they had a team size of like this much, they sold an estimated number of units of this size, and it also went out to, this target audience, people who are enthusiastic about social sims or something. Then that second tier is usually a game of a similar scale. It's just kind of providing a second validation. But getting to that third one is where I might toss in some information that helps to say, hey, it's like this game because you've probably heard about it, but it's to the scope of these others that we've already mentioned. And so, if Zelda is coming into your slide, I think it should be really deferred, if not avoided, to help convey more of the data that would be associated with the potential game sales and the units that have moved across, because we should not be trying to convey that our game that from a studio that you've never heard of is going to sell as many units as Zelda. That would be risky.
And I will actually stand corrected. Medusa just pointed out on the Discord that if you're in New York, there is a game development fund that they're trying to get. So
nice.
1 out of 50 states ain't bad.
Yes, and home to the the NYU Game Center, so it would make sense that there might be some paths that are happening out of there. Also, Playcrafting is also based in New York, which have provided some really cool games funding opportunities. So they're there. They are out there.
So I got an update. One of my favorite little go-to sites for doing all these competitive analysis and research. And granted, it's like Steam Spy, and Steam Spy does this, but you have to be on a certain Patreon tier to have access to it. VG Insights, who I highly recommend because they come, one, because they come from our Discord and they got their shit together and they do a really good site. You can go in now on VG Insights and say, okay, I want to see the crossover of people who played Zelda and what the fuck ever, Command and Conquer. And it will show you in a Venn diagram, this many people have both of these games in their library on Steam. When you're going and doing that comparative analysis and that pitching, that's a very important stat. Now you need to pick games that aren't AAA if you're doing an indie game. But if you can look and say, okay, here are the indie games that are comparable. Ours is a melding of these two, and this is the potential market in there, because you can actually see that is a wonderful way to do it. And I have no problem plugging the folks over at VG Insights, because they just added that to their repertoire as what you can do on their site as well. So especially since you're in the academic world, so you see a lot of this stuff with tools, and we don't even need to get into AI. We can get into it if you want to. That's a whole different ball of wax. But what are you seeing now that's new? Even since you all launched your game, in terms of tools and resources that are out there that are making this easier for developers, because obviously the easier it is, the cheaper it is, the more sustainable your company is. What have you seen that's new out there that's helping?
Yeah, in the time that we released, when we built Onsen Master, that was built off of Unity, I did the majority of the 3D models and a good chunk of the animations, all of which came exported out of Maya. Both of those platforms we now have new forms of like really decent competing software for those platforms. This whole year I've been learning how to use Godot, because I'm really invigorated by an open source game engine that is offering a really friendly proprietary script for that engine, the GD script that's based there. And then Blender, it existed then and has continued to provide really impactful plugins, and was always in the back of my mind of being like, hey, you should use Blender. And was a lot of emphasis was placed on that with the development of new tools and plugins for it, things like Grease Pencil, things like which you're not really using it for games, but things like its sculpting capabilities and the plugins to support that. So open source engines and open source software have been some of the coolest things to emerge as of late, or really evolve as of late. And I think seeing people take advantage of those and build experiences off of them. Godot has a YouTube channel where they're always sharing, what's been built in Godot as of late. It's really cool to see that stuff. The last point that I'll make is, the support for more like DRM free or open source communities. And so itch.io, ballooned as a space when we were making Onsen Master. And I think it's also a really great path for people to support the development and release of games, and also support other creators.
Did you use Itch at all? I mean, because it's just one of those sites that, we constantly tell people, it's like, once you put your game in early access on Steam, you basically just shot yourself in the foot in terms of getting a publisher. It's just not like that at all. I mean,
Right.
I have never seen a publisher turn down a game because, well, it's been released on Itch.
Right.
Is that something that you all used or that you are using now for testing, just getting stuff out there and getting feedback on it?
Not right now. I like Itch for like sharing and development. For me, I like using it for the sharing and contributing to other game projects, usually in the form of like solo devs or and I mean sincerely solo devs, somebody who just made it themselves and they're sharing it out there. And smaller teams, as well as the promotion of assets for people who are maybe not from a creative background that are trying to find ways that they can build their projects. So that's been the main path that I've leveraged itch.io for our current project and for the one we were prototyping. I've honestly have not weighed using it as a means for playtesting. I would have to think about that one. I'm not certain if I would. I don't have any indication as to why or why not, but
well, don't worry. That's the way a lot of the publishers look at Itch either. It's like, we don't really know what people do on that site, so we're not really going to penalize for it.
Yeah, maybe that's the benefit. Maybe the sort of like the publishers maybe having or not having a macro understanding of how Itch could be leveraged might be beneficial for play
it's
testing.
more of a sense of there has yet to be a substantial dip in sales on any other platform simply because a game was out there on Itch.
Yeah.
There's a lot of companies that have successfully used it, not only for playtesting and getting feedback from the community, but for also building a community.
Yeah.
And if I'm not wrong, Vampire Survivor started on Itch.
And cool. Okay.
I may have completely pulled that out of my ass, but
it would not shock me.
I think it did. If it wasn't that one, it was another one. There have been big games that got spawned out of Itch that sold really, really well. One of the questions that just popped up, and I really want to touch on too, is the explanation of Godot, because we had Jenny from Paizo on last week, and it was much the same. We talked about what happened at Paizo after Hasbro stuck their foot in their mouth with the OGL thing, and we have the same thing that happened with Godot and Unity after Unity shot themselves in the thigh with their whole, back model. Explain the difference between Godot being open source and Unreal being open source.
Okay. Let me think here. So in the way of, so I'm hoping that I'm not wrong here, because I understand Godot being open source in the way that I understand Blender being open source, and that people, the community who uses it, have the freedom to contribute and make plugins for it at any juncture. And then oftentimes some of those plugins get like really heavily embraced by the engine itself. And so some of the kind of biggest changes that have come to Blender have come from people who just made their own update, and then it got widely shared. That is my understanding of the open sourceness to Godot. I don't know to what degree Unreal is open source, and I don't believe that it would, especially when you release a game on Unreal Engine, that it would match kind of the open source expectations that one might have when they release a game using Godot, and that you're not paying fees. And if that's not the case for Unreal right now, that's not going to stay the case for forever. That's a whole huge company.
Yeah, that is what I was getting at.
Yeah.
You are eventually at some point going to end up paying
You
Unreal
will
money.
pay them. Yeah.
Yes. Godot, not, and given the fact that, teams with success like Slay the Spire,
Mhm.
have successfully gone and said, you know what, we're doing this in Godot. And I've talked to a couple of other studios. You never really know when some drama like that, pops out and everybody's like, screw Unity, we're going to Godot. It's like, how
Uh-huh.
many of them are actually going to do that?
Yeah.
And how many of them are like too far down the path to
Yeah.
worry about it? But when you start seeing companies that actually, went through with it and said, look, we released on this perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
It's a different engine. Go with it. It's something, but there is a difference between the two because
Mhm.
at some point you're going to be paying Tim money if you're overly successful.
Yes. Yes, you will.
Whereas not the same thing with Godot. Uh, Weighing in on your university experience
Mhm.
for those people who are out there listening and they're really just wanting to get a start. Where is it in the industry? What are the paths of entry that you most highly recommend for getting into the game industry, either as simply a contributor, an employee, or as, okay, I want to do this on my own?
Right. Okay, so I think each of these are providing fundamentally the skills and understanding that exposure. That's kind of the goal. The end goal is getting that exposure, and a lot of it relies on how much self motivation or accountability you need to attain that exposure. And so this requires a deep and honest self assessment that says if you are capable of learning and adhering to your own schedule and developing skills in your own time, consuming tutorials, consuming blog posts, consuming community forums for how to build projects, then I would firmly suggest trying to develop solo projects and navigate that with developing your own community, maybe through game jams or again, kind of releasing projects to your own itch.io page and developing your own community online, or at least your own network. Let me say it that way, of people who are also building games in that way. If you know for sure you need the responsibility set in place by like institutionalized responsibility, somebody is saying to you, do this thing, you will get this sort of like record of assessment that you have done this thing or performed well in it. Sometimes that sort of like validation, it might be necessary for somebody to feel confident that they're entering the space in the right way. Then sure, go down that academic path. Depending on where you are in the world, that might come cheaper than here. And so I think there is a lot of value to that, because it also again, it gives you that accountability, it gives you the responsibility, but then you also oftentimes get to build projects with people who you might collectively convert into being a team. And so you're exiting your degree and entering into the start of an industry with colleagues that you're going to see age up together. And so that's one path. Um, but like, and then kind of thinking about the third, for people who maybe enter into that studio experience and they want to learn how to be a character artist. Maybe they have attained those skills from university or from self-learning, but now they realize that sort of not institutionalized, but like rigid, that sort of form might be necessary to help garner more skills. I say that kind of separately because all of it can kind of weave together. It's not so siloed that you're in a university setting and this is only it. You can be in a university, but you can also be working on solo projects. I have students who do that. Or you could be a university and you could be working at a studio as like an intern or a junior artist or a junior designer. So it all begins with that very honest self-assessment, though, understanding what you need to support you.
Because are you trying to say that the wonderful U.S. education system and/or healthcare system is not affordable to everybody, Derek? I
You will
mean,
get scammed.
yeah.
Don't do that.
So someone pointed out something, and I have a question on it. Nikolai says the free in FOSS means free as in liberty, not necessarily free as in beer. Unreal is free up to a point. Godot is free all the way, as in beer. And I want to know where Nikolai's getting all the free beer.
Where are you getting free beer from? Do you?
That is what I want to know right now. I don't care about my engine anymore. Where are you getting free beer?
We live in a country where some of our water is not free, so it's
all of the drinking water that is not free.
I would not recommend drinking that water from the tap. We microplastics and.
All right, we got two good ones coming in here. I love it when y'all start doing everybody gives the questions, because then I don't really have to do anything except sit here and look smart and read.
Yeah.
Any tips on reaching out to freelance concept artists on LinkedIn?
I am curious, maybe why LinkedIn specifically. From personal experience, I would say as a creator, maybe this is the same for other creatives, but I am just not checking my LinkedIn very much. It's not something that I am tuned to. I think if you are seeking to reach concept artists, maybe go to the spaces that concept artists are most affluent. These are spaces like ArtStation, and then Twitter, and sometimes Instagram. Pixiv is another site that I know of, but I think you got to go find where they're at. LinkedIn is so much of a business focused platform that it just doesn't seem like that they're kind of meeting and greeting there very much.
It is one of those things that I think a lot of people, I mean, especially if they listen to this show, because I don't know all about ArtStation or anything along those lines. On the business side, LinkedIn is where you go.
Yeah.
If you're not networking at a conference, but you're right. On the art side, or for any creative, truthfully, LinkedIn is not your best source. LinkedIn is where you're going to find people like me, not people like you and like the students that I sit down with at some of these conferences, and they've got a tablet, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "Well, I'm modeling and drawing something and sculpting in 3D with a pen and a tablet." And I'm like, I don't even understand. That's just fucking wizardry to me. Okay, I don't get that. But there are other better places to go than there, and that's how you do it, because you've got to go where your audience is, and a lot of that creative audience is not on LinkedIn. That's where the business people are.
Yeah, it does kind of speak to, the nature of portfolios and, the people who are trying to collaborate on projects. They, of course, go to where their community is the largest. And so, I can't speak to where all of the sound artists and composers are promoting their content outside of, I'm reluctant to even mention SoundCloud, because I know that there's other things out there. But that's the first thing that comes to mind. I would try to sit in the mindset of the person that you're trying to collaborate with, and then go to their community.
All right. So next one, can Derrick speak to the thrive part? I mean, can any of us really speak to the thrive part? How do we level up as indies from micro jams to pro?
Okay. Well, let me be the first to say the imposter syndrome never goes away. The suggestion of the word pro, it puts a lot of pressure and anxiety on me to get this answer really right. I fundamentally just think keep going, because at least for me, kind of trusting in the process of failing so I can understand what went wrong so I can make a better success the next time has been tried and true. And I try to support that with any form of like literature or mentor to keep me encouraged. If that is not within your network, then please let me be the first to say to keep going, because it is the experience, I think, and the sort of like time dedicating to that experience in the process that you then end up looking back going, oh, I guess it has been, a decade, and I am now mentoring other people because of X, Y, and Z that has occurred in my life. But I'm still learning. I'm still learning every day. I mentioned the sort of trials and tribulations that we went through wanting to fund a large game and then scoping all the way down, and right now today advocating so heavily for the development of like small and impactful games to really hone in on your process as a studio, because that was an experience that I not like recent, but like recently lived. So I don't know. You think you can go to a pro and they're going to be like, I'm not a pro. I'm still figuring this out. We are all still figuring this out. Yeah.
If we weren't all still figuring this out, and I'm including myself in this, then we would all be a lot richer. I mean,
Right.
that's the reality of it. And it's like there's.
Yep. Oh no, please go ahead. I said something to add there.
I mean, but I mean, we see it with publishers, and people will sit down. And it's like, oh, well, this company's got it all figured out, and it's like, well, no, they don't, because they had one success that they're known for, and they've had 3 or 4 failures. And it's like, if they had it all figured out, and we all knew what the hell we were doing, it would be success after success after success, or at least something closer to what we have right now.
Yeah, and I would add to that if there was like a rigid kind of like tried and true method for doing it all, then we would also attain such saturation that it would force people to figure out something new, and so there we would be yet again figuring things out.
You're in a constant state in this industry of figuring shit out. That's just basically what it is. We've got time for maybe one more after this one. But Thomas says, what is the most important piece of advice you can give a small studio trying to survive until they get profit or get funded?
Do not shift over to being a full-time studio until that happens. I know it feels like a dream that we all want to attain, to be able to support and have a studio that runs full-time off of its own merit and revenue. But that is extremely hard. I teach at a university because that is not true for our studio. We do not solely run off of revenue. I think that has to remain in place for everybody. The video games industry largely has shown that it's an unpredictable space, and as much as any creative industry, like more unpredictable than just getting a tech position somewhere in another corporation. I think you should hang on to those support systems that you have, depending on where you are in the world, and continue making the projects that you care about in a scope that makes sense for you until one of them does convert over, and you can knowingly make the decision to say, oh, actually, let me back up. Let me back up and say, like, even if it were to convert over to revenue, make sure that revenue can actually earmark yourself for a handful of years. Don't just say like, cool, we made X amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars this year. We're full time now. What if it doesn't happen again? Not every game is going to be a banger. So, you have to like release a game and always be planning for the lower outcomes.
Plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Yep.
But yeah, and it is. And the other thing is until you get to the point where basically you've got a bank funding you, or a fund, or you've had some ridiculously successful game, if you've got 3 months of runway in this industry, you're good. You're doing better than about 90% of the companies that are out there. And so it's one of those things that there's only so much that you can do in reality. But you can't just stop peddling ever, because this industry will absolutely suck you up. All right, last question, because this is a good one. If a game didn't launch well on Steam, does it make any difference if it comes out on other consoles?
Sometimes. It depends on how that release is supported. So On Semester had a rocky release on Steam. It was met with mixed reviews, and but for Switch and Xbox, we did a little bit better in the release category. We also had released with Game Pass on Xbox, right? No, yes. I might not remember that. Sorry, we had a deal for release on Xbox as well, and so that helped support some of that. And I think just depending on the type of game, it might be received differently. Sometimes you get that extra boost in marketing. Sometimes you get to go out on one of their other promotion campaigns when they do a certain bulk of like titles, and so. Yeah, I wouldn't let Steam just be the only indication about how your game is going to perform. sometimes the genre of the game feels different from a PC to a couch. And so, well, we got Steam Decks now, so, it can be anything. But yeah.
That is like my go-to indie platform now. It's my Steam Deck, because I can just sit there on the couch and, if the family's watching something else, I don't care. I'm sitting there playing, possibly still Stardew to this day or whatever it is.
Yep.
But you're dead on right. Just because you don't have a great success on Steam or any one platform for that matter, doesn't mean you're going to do better on one of the other ones. And given, in a perspective, the lower cost of being able to move those over to other platforms right now, you're doing yourself a gigantic disservice by not planning for that in the short term. Because something that was like mediocre on Steam could absolutely blow up on Switch, and something that didn't do well on PS5 can do fantastic on Xbox or PC. So yes, always.
Well, and let me add just briefly. There's also there are so many games in general, but there are so many games on Steam because you can release a build, you pay the Steam platform fee, and you put it out there. There are so many games on Steam. That does not dismiss the bulk of games that are on any individual platform, but I think if you can go through that process, whether yourself or through support of like a publisher or porting service, you're helping to reach other audiences who may not have a PC.
Derrick, thank you so much. This has been awesome. This has been fun. Anything that you want to plug or get out there or endorse and support before we go?
Sure. So I mean, thanks for the invitation. It's been a pleasure to be here and talk about games. I love doing it. I mentioned earlier that we are working on a new title. And so if you want to follow me and follow about that game, it's both on Twitter and sharing some of the development about it on Patreon. This game is different for me in that I want to share as much of the development process as I can to help highlight some of those trials and tribulations down to mistakes. I've been talking about the pitches that I've been going through. So Take Form. It's an enigmatic game about game development where a parasite infects a person's head and they're trying to grapple with all of that. It's really bizarre, but follow up with me on social media if you want to keep tabs on it. I'm talking as often as I can about what the hell's going on. And
okay,
so
now I have to, and I'm not on X anymore. We literally deleted everything that we had on X. So I'll have to follow otherwise. But I mean, if we're talking, brain worms are in the news now. Apparently, that's
oh my God, that's right.
I mean, we've got the politicians that have the brain worms running for president. So you could be absolutely dead on here, Derrick. Perfect timing on everything.
Oh, I'm not doing it intentionally, but if there is some sort of cosmic alignment, shout outs to that happening. I rock with it.
Right now, we take all the help we can get anywhere we can get it. So, but thank you so much. Derrick's on the Discord. He's got the coveted guest of the show tag, so you can find him in the big yellow section. If you've got questions, if you want to reach out, he's on Patreon. If you want to find anything about what we're doing coming up, it's all on our new website, IndieGameBusiness.com or IndieGame.business. We've got our weekly, I know Pebs has had a busy week because this week we had our weekly pitch deck reviews that anyone on the Discord can tune in and watch, or you can submit your game and we'll do a review on it. We also had a monthly legal Q&A review this week, and one of Michael Brown's marketing Q&A that I listened in on, and I even learned some stuff on that one as well.
Amazing.
So go to discord.gg/IndieGameBusiness. Follow us. All of our stuff is on the website. Thank you all so much. Enjoy, at least in the U.S., we got a long weekend. We got Memorial Day. For everybody else, I mean, go to work, do whatever you do on Monday. Since we're going to be lounging around, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.